All again, or to be seen by you, I guess, right? Can't really see you, but I know you're out there, and that's all that matters when it comes to doing our live streams together. That and that the audio's good, right? I haven't done a live stream in a few weeks, so I needed to get a couple things set right. But I think we're good to go. So, we'll take a few minutes just to let whoever is available join us. I see Tarantula Clan is in the chat. Good to see you, Tarantula Clan. And I'll give a few updates before we start the show. CWJah Talk 44. Free Christian evidence that Jesus is the biblical Messiah. It's really a series of shows designed for people that believe the Bible, like the Jews, but don't believe Jesus is the biblical Messiah. So we don't go through the different non-biblical historical sources to try to prove Jesus was a real person. I've already done a video on that subject and an accompanying article going through the evidence, which is significant, better than you will find proving that most ancient people existed. In this series, though, we talk about the biblical evidence that points to him from the Old Testament to the New, that Jesus is the biblical Messiah. Good to see you, Bankhead. George, very nice. So I've put a link in the description below to the playlist that contains this series of videos. I think it also includes the video about the historicity of Jesus. And then in the description to that video, you will find the article, maybe even to this video, where I document the historical non-biblical sources that I also talk about in that video. So, again, we'll take just a few minutes before we get started. But in this show, we're going to talk about Isaiah 7:14, the text that is the basis for what in the New Testament is described as the virgin birth of Jesus. GL, nice to see you. I understand you're busy working, but glad you stopped in to say hello. It's always nice to have you with us, but do your thing. Take care of your business. Video will be here for you later. And so we'll get to that in just a moment, but we've done several shows. GL, well, thank you, GL. It's always nice when you give a super chat. And as I've said before, they're not required, of course. I do these free of charge, and I just take care of things on my own. But when you show appreciation like that, I recognize it, and I definitely appreciate any gesture you make, whether it's monetary or just being in the chat and saying hello, sharing the videos, right? Giving a like. All of these things are appreciated and help promote the message, which is that Jesus is the biblical Messiah, and that we have outstanding reasons for believing that. We have outstanding reasons, as I've mentioned, and as I discussed in the sources that I mentioned, my video and my writing, my article, that Jesus was a real historical person. And we have outstanding evidence that we've talked about to a pretty good extent so far in this series, that the Old Testament books and other books, but I'm referring, when I say the Old Testament, basically to the commonly accepted Old Testament books, the best books and writings that document the history of the people of the God Jah, Jehovah, Jaho, in English, right? We know that in Hebrew and in Greek, his name was likely Yahweh. And if you want to use an elongated form, Yahuwah. But the most undisputed form is Jah, Yah, the one whom Jesus came to tell everyone about, the Son of the God, Yah, Yahweh, Yahuwah. So thank you, GL. Thank you all for being here this evening. This will be the last live stream of this year. Of course, we only have like 2 more weeks of this year, so that's not a big deal, right? But I probably will be taking off. I don't know, but I'm going to need some time to take care of some very important things at the start of this new year, 2022. So that doesn't mean I won't upload any videos, and it doesn't necessarily mean I will not do a live stream at all in January or February. But I'm going to be busy with very important things and people, just like you, very important people, very important things. But I have to have more balance starting out the new year before I get back into any kind of live show flow. But when I do return to the live shows, again, I may upload some videos, some clips from older videos. Maybe I'll do a recording offline. But the next live show I have planned will be the Bible and the Trinity in Conflict Part 20. John 20:17 and 20:28. Wanted all the 20s together, you know what I mean? Just seemed like that would be a good way to group that show on part 20. But I have such, we've talked about those texts a lot. And I think I've covered essentially what I'm going to talk about. But the whole show, and I've got more, and I'm going to bring together several texts that will help reinforce the understanding that we get from the Bible in those texts, from Jesus and from his followers. So you can look forward to that. That is coming. I just don't know if I'll be able to get that done in January or February. But once I'm ready to come back to live streaming, that'll be the next one. Most likely, right? Unless something changes. But that's on the docket, right? That's definitely coming, Jah willing, to kind of put the whole Bible and the Trinity and Conflict series at a good round number 20. And then we're not done, but I'll probably stop there for a little while, move over into some other videos, or I might go into the early church writings and talk more about some of the earlier Christian writers, right? I've already talked about the text involving Pliny the Younger and the early Christians right after the turn of the 1st century into the 2nd century CE. I've already talked about Clement of Rome. I have a few more things I could say about Clement of Rome, and I might, but then I want to get into it. Ignatius of Antioch, and then I want to move forward into some of the other early Christian writings before we get into the Ante-Nicene Fathers, and then into the Church Fathers, getting closer to the time around the councils and creeds. It brought us the Trinity. So, I have a lot more planned, but you may need to give me a little time at the start of 2022 before I get back to all of it. But when I do, that's where it's going to go. I also have another video that I may either upload or do a live stream on the divine name. And I'm going to talk about Masoretic text issues. I'm going to address certain people that have been promoting forms of the name based on the Masoretic texts. You don't want to miss that. I've got some really outstanding stuff. And of course, I've already done several videos on the divine name. You can see the playlist on this channel for more information there. And then, of course, my writings you can get on Amazon or Elihu Books, where I have really a book within the book, right? The chapter on the divine name in my 2nd and 3rd editions that you can get digitally or in writing, in print, is really a book within a book, right? It's well over 100 pages with extensive notes and charts, and really talks about all of the issues, really, right? It gives a ton of information. So you can take a look at that if you want to supplement the videos I've done. And then once I get to the next divine name video, I think I will have covered it all. I've talked about all the pre-Masoretic evidence, all the phonetic evidence. I've talked about the use of the divine name in the Old Testament, the New Testament, in the church fathers, my videos and my writings, in Josephus, and in other texts. So, but I have more, a little bit more to add to it. So we'll see how soon I can get back to videos after tonight's live stream. But I really appreciate all your support, everybody. You guys have been great, and I know you're enthusiastic about what we're doing, which is promoting the truth about the God of the Bible and the Messiah, the Christ, the one whom we believe the God of the Bible sent forth as a ransom, right? As the promised seed of Genesis 3:15, also a video I did on, text I did a video on in this series, that would bring an end to the serpent, the wicked one, the dragon, who deceived our first human parents, at least one, who then in turn misled the other, and here we are, right? Here we are in a state where we require forgiveness for the mistakes that we make, and we believe that in Jesus' name we have that forgiveness. If we exercise faith in his name, if we believe that he's the one, the sent forth one. And that doesn't mean that nobody else can be saved, right? We know that in the New Testament, we're told that people have a law written on their hearts that is used to make decisions when they don't even know about the Christ. We know that the CWJah speaks about knowing people like Jeremiah before they were even born, right? Because he knows based on the genetics, the combination of genes that come from the parents or people that he knows will come together to make children. He can see, he can determine what kind of person that will become, although we do have his spirit within us, so we get to choose and demonstrate who we are. He can also harden our heart if he doesn't like us, right? Just like the religious leaders of Jesus' day, John 12, fulfillment of prophecies from Isaiah that talk about how he would blind their eyes and harden their hearts, just like with Pharaoh, right? Because he doesn't want some people to do anything. He's such a loving God, right? He's tolerating us. People say, well, he's loving. Well, why is he killing everybody? We killed ourselves, okay? And we kill ourselves by the choices we make that we inherited based on the condition we received from our parents, our earliest parents. And so in allowing us to live or die early before we can live, but yet know who we are based on the kind of person he sees we would become, the CWJah doesn't owe anyone life. It's a gift. It was originally a gift. It's still a gift. Only now it's a gift that comes through his son. After we've already inherited wickedness and demonstrate wickedness to differing degrees. And so what does he owe us? Why would the God who created all things owe us anything? And then when you look at the choices some of us make, right? That's not what he made us to do. And so you get a lot of atheists and others who run around blaspheming the God of the Bible, blaspheming the Messiah, because they don't think that the God who created all life, since life can only come from life, there is no exception. And yet they can't see that as a telltale, right? They can't figure that one out. No, instead they create laboratories and experimental apparatuses and infuse gases and compounds and create amino acids and claim that it happened spontaneously, that that's how life originated on its own, apart from intelligence, even though what they did was completely based on intelligence. They're actually proving God exists and they're denying it at the same time. It's ridiculous. And yet we get a lot of these atheists as well who claim to believe in science, right? Yet they can't figure out where the source of life is. Life, it's eternal, because you can't break the chain. Life only comes from life. We see it every day. And yet, if you go to some of these atheist channels, I challenge any of you, put a link in the channel or send it to me, to any atheist, like a hardened atheist, not just someone who is an atheist, but the ones who are out there promoting their blasphemous, non-scientific views. You show me one that has any video or even a part of one video where they openly tell the truth about homos and the abuse that is absolutely scientifically demonstrable and undeniable. Many of these atheists are homos, right? That's why they want to feel better about themselves and their abusive practices and disgusting acts that take off 20 years of life on average from people. That's not love. If you're taking 20 years off your life or someone else's life by what you're doing, that's not love. If your rear end is bleeding after you've had a relationship with someone, that's not love. If you have to call a proctologist after you've had sex with someone, that's not love. It's abuse. And yet all these so-called scientific atheists can't figure out that practice is abuse. It's damaging people. It's destructive. They'll talk about pedos sometimes, right? When they get to attack groups like the Watchtower or others, because it makes them feel better about their God-denying beliefs. And yet they'll claim that homos are just born that way. Well, what about pedos? They're not born that way? Why couldn't a pedo just say, I'm born that way, I can't help it? Well, guess what? I'm a hetero, and I have strong feelings toward the opposite gender, but I can control it. Right? I may get weak at times, I may feel ways at times. Most of the time, I can control it. And I know even when I can't control it, when I'm doing something wrong, and then I change it. So you homos and pedos can do the same thing. You're no different from a heterosexual like me, who has just as strong of urges, and probably stronger, because mine is based on biology, actual physical responses to the opposite sex in ways that we were meant to express. What you're doing is not designed what you were designed for. Proof positive, bleeding rear end. You have to be stitched up. You have to be plugged up. You're damaging each other. And you so-called atheists who love to talk about science can't figure that out. It's incredible. You show me one. Show me just one. And I'll tell that atheist, hey, at least you're being honest. At least you're trying to help these homos and abusive people know what they're doing. If they want to do it, great. Go for it. These atheists who claim to believe in science and use science can't even be honest with homosexuals when it comes to science. That it's bad for them. That it's destructive. Because they don't love them. We do. We actually have the courage to tell the truth and not just lie to people so they keep damaging themselves in society and pretending like, oh, it's just some alternate lifestyle. Yeah, in an alternate universe. In this universe, it's abuse. It's damaging to you and that person in society. It has not one single redeeming quality. Nothing positive. You don't have love. If you had love, you wouldn't be damaging the person you claim to love. And then you want to talk about how God isn't love because he punishes people like you who promote abuse and who lie to people and say, oh, there's nothing wrong with it. There's a very good reason why God destroys people. Because we make mistakes that are not acceptable. And you atheistic homos or homo supporters are some of the worst. You're cowards. You don't use science. You deny actual science, like Miller and Urey's experiment, which proves intelligence would have to have been present for early Earth atmospheric compounds and gases and a similar equation to have existed. You actually set it all up with intelligence and then deny intelligence. And then you run around and telling homos there's nothing wrong with that. It's just fine, no problem. So you're ridiculous. We look at evidence, actual evidence, and we're consistent. We look at history, we look at the facts, and we can establish that eternal intelligent life exists. It's scientifically demonstrable based on the fact that life exists. and that all life that exists is complete, has a utility, right? We don't have all these half transitioning creatures and things all throughout the fossil record. You guys just make stuff up and create these connections that are no way, in any way, shape, or form, what you would have if you had all this accidental stuff. Everything is there's bilateral symmetry. There's other types of symmetry. Every creature, all the way back to the dinosaurs, has symmetry. You have the Tyrannosaurus Rex with those teeny little arms, gigantic head, gigantic tail, big legs. Guess what? It was efficient. And just like every other dinosaur, was designed. Anyone could look at that and tell that. They are not just evolving from all of these accidentally forming life forms that you can't even establish would have come from a non-life form. And then you try to argue that all these chaotic cosmic collisions and volcanoes and earthquakes and all this ridiculous stuff that actually destroys and doesn't build life is responsible for all this stuff. It's just as bad, if not worse, as telling homos there's nothing wrong with that. And just like with homos and their abusive sex, there's something wrong with that. With the way you talk about life forming and evolving over time, as if it doesn't have an intelligent mind behind it. So paying attention to people like that, don't let them bring you down. They're ridiculous. Again, show me one of these people that has ever warned homosexuals because of the science, right? I'm not talking about warning them because of what the Bible says. Show me one of these atheists that actually has taken the time and has the courage to tell the truth about the abuse that's costing people decades off their life, quality off their life, destroying their life and their rear end functionality, right? There's a reason they have to wear plugs, because they stretch their anal organ beyond its elasticity and they can't hold the seal anymore. It's disgusting. And they don't want to talk about it. So I have to talk about it. Because if no one talks about it, they'll keep gaslighting everyone and saying there's nothing wrong with it. Just like they gaslight everyone and say all this stuff, all this intelligent life, accidentally formed without intelligence. It just happened through all of these accidental collisions and eruptions and right? It's so ridiculous when you think about it. You can't have life coming from the universe and getting past the cosmic rays of the sun to even get into a soup. So they just have nothing to start with. They never did. And their whole process, even if you give them to start with, something to start with, is ridiculous. It doesn't account for all the perfectly formed forms of life that have come forward on this planet to provide utility to its environment in all the different periods of time in the past. And I find it interesting and supportive of the biblical narrative that there is no life on other planets that's been found yet. I'm not saying there's not like microscopic life or some kind of life out there that's just providing some kind of interplanetary utility or even planetary utility. But we don't know. It's not there, right? Well, the Bible says this is the beginning. This is where it began. Now, how would it have known that? How would the Bible writers, did they just guess? They saw all these planets and stars out there, and they just said, you know what? This is it. This is where it started, right here. Pretty good guess. I don't think it was a guess at all. I think it was the truth. And it was the truth communicated by God. All right, so I got all that out, right? Trying to give you guys a little bit of encouragement, enthusiasm. Don't let these people bring you down. Do not let them destroy your faith in the best available reasons for your faith, one of which we're going to consider tonight, one piece of the evidence we're going to consider tonight. But just look at what they do. Look at how they deny science, from their own experiments that have intelligence behind all of it, to life only coming from life, and then all the different types of life throughout history that have lived. They're not accidental. They're not just evolving without intelligence behind it. And even these people believe there have been near extinction events several times. And yet they have a problem understanding how a gigantic ark, multi-level ark, with creatures according to their kinds, could reproduce and bring forth all the different types of life we see. They themselves believe that happened. They believe it happened multiple times and just didn't have any intelligence behind it, right? They're actually more ridiculous than they think we're ridiculous. Isn't it not much more believable that an intelligent creator could preserve numerous amounts of animals to reproduce according to their kinds, and so not homo animals? Because that would end the species, right? It's another problem they never address. There's no utility or benefit to it at all. It only damages and destroys, whereas normal heterosexual sex gives life. It couldn't be any more different. And yet they're running around here acting like it's no different. Yet these are the same people that believe that near extinction events have happened multiple times, and yet without any intelligence, all this life has re-evolved. And yet when we tell them that there was a near extinction event, but that was planned over multiple decades, supported by places like Göbekli Tepe, which they still can't understand, which is several hundred miles from Mount Ararat, which is where the Bible says the ark landed. I believe that's where Noah kept the animals. They're all there, images of every single type of creature that Noah was told to bring into the ark. So we have actual evidence fitting the historical timeline. They lie and pretend that Göbekli Tepe is like 10, 12,000 years ago. No, it's not. They don't have any evidence for any kind of tools or writing going back that far. And yet they made Göbekli Tepe that far back? No. No, it's all consistent with the same time frame that we have for writing, metallurgy, and astronomy, which is about 5,000, 6,000 years ago. And the reason Göbekli Tepe is buried, right, this is another reason why they think it's older, is because of the flood. The flood moved all that sand. It's buried in sand and buried it. But they can't even put that together, right? Because to put that together would mean they'd have to have faith in the God of the Bible, or at least the narrative of the flood, right? But we're the ridiculous ones. We're the ones who are believing in this story about an ark that was planned for decades, creatures according to their kind, reproduced, spread all the different species that are spreadable from those kinds. We have places like Göbekli Tepe that support the historical narrative that is in all kinds of different cultures. And yet we're supposed to reject all that and believe in near extinction events and all these animals and creatures re-evolving without intelligence, without any planning. Oh, you see how far gone they are and how close we are to the right things, to the right conclusions. Our beliefs are based on actual historical evidence, things we can point to, arguments we can make, real science, which they half bake and then pretend it's real. And yet they can't even figure out that homosexuality is bad for you, that they should actually be warning people. Hey, if you want to destroy yourselves, go ahead. But guess what? You're going to lose multiple decades off your life. You're going to have a hard time keeping a seal. You'll have to wear a plug, or there's going to be some real problems. And not to mention all the disease, mental illness, and other problems that have been documented to be a sign and characteristic of homo-abusive relationships. No reproduction of the species either. And yet they think that's just no problem at all. So don't let it make you surprised that these same people deny all this other evidence, whether it's the Bible, archaeology like Göbekli Tepe, or just the the scientific arguments, we can show that intelligence would have to be behind the formation of compounds as well as life coming from life. So I say all that because, again, I won't be seeing you for a little while, and I want you to have faith. I want you to recognize that these people that have no faith in the evidence, whether it's scientific, historical, or literary, that we can point to show is consistent with the historical archaeological evidence, these same people that deny all that and make light of all that have the most ridiculous alternatives I think you could imagine, right? Whether it's their view of the near extinction events and the resulting re-evolution of life without intelligence, or whether it's their view of sexual orientation and how that's just the same and there's no problem at all. Show me one of them. Give me one atheist, especially one that likes to attack the Bible or attack different groups like Watchtower and others. Show me one of these people, because I haven't seen it yet. They're gutless, they're cowards, and they're liars. Not only about the God of the Bible, but about their own existence. Because they don't have any arguments. Who's going to justify smashing open your rear end and calling that love? Who's going to justify using your toxic waste removal exit-only organ as a quasi-vagina? No one, right? They're inseminating toxic human waste, tearing open each other's rear ends, damaging people beyond belief, right? Again, they're destroying their toxic waste removal system by simulating a sex act that's meant to be, designed to be done between heteros using complementary organs that don't damage each other, by the way. Oh, and also result in life. Maintain the species. They destroy themselves and the species. We maintain the species. Who's scientific again? Exactly. Don't let these people damage your faith. They're damaged, right? They can't even be honest about their own rear ends or anybody else's and what homo does to it. And of course, there's problems also with the lesbos. Right? They get abused mentally, physically, emotionally. Right? They're obviously designed, anyone who does an anatomy study of the female reproductive system and sexual organs, right? They're perfectly complementary to the male system. So what they're promoting and the things they promote, they don't follow science. They follow ridiculousness. And they don't look to history the way we do because they prefer ridiculousness. I just gave a few examples. In the future, I will do more videos about atheists, their ridiculous belief in non-intelligent evolution of life, and of course, their cowardiceness when it comes to having sex. Because I haven't found one. I would genuinely like any of you to tell me if you have found one single atheist that has had the courage to mention in a video. I mean, if you can find a whole video, I doubt it, right? They claim to believe in science so much. Where's the science, atheists? Don't you care about your fellow human? You care about us so much, you want to help us not believe in God. Oh, that's very nice of you. Why don't you help the homos understand real science so they actually live longer? So they actually have a better life? So their rear end actually seals up normally, like people who have normal sex in life? That would actually be a sign that you care about people. Because from what I can tell, you not only don't care about people, some of you don't even seem to care about yourselves. Oh well, I wish you well, but I wish you would teach science well and be consistent, not only where it concerns the Bible and experiments and things that I've talked about, life coming from life, formation of compounds, all your experiments having intelligence behind them, none of them happening accidentally without intelligence, but just basic stuff, right? You guys can't even get sex right, and you lie about it just to make yourselves or people you know feel better. When in fact, you're making them worse, a lot worse, and you're costing them decades off of their life. It's incredible. Let's get to the video. CWJah Talk number 44. Pre-Christian evidence Jesus is the biblical Messiah. Isaiah 7:14. It's a text that is preserved in numerous manuscripts or fragments of manuscripts that predate the birth of Jesus. I should probably say not necessarily the full text. Some of the fragments or manuscripts that contain parts of Isaiah only have parts of Isaiah chapter 7, some of Isaiah chapter 8 and surrounding context stuff that's all consistent with the Masoretic text. But we do have the great Isaiah scroll, which does preserve Isaiah 7:14, and it is dated to the 2nd century BCE. So 150 to 200 years before Jesus began teaching, before he went into the synagogue and read from the Isaiah scroll. We have texts that tell us that there would come a time when the Israelites would have a male child born to them that would do things that are unique. And I've done a video already on Isaiah 9, 5, and 6 that talk about this child. But I believe the child is actually referred to earlier in Isaiah 7:14. Now, in the New Testament, which we'll get to in Matthew chapter 1 and Luke chapter 1, it talks about the birth of Jesus. It talks about how Mary, Jesus' mother, describes her as being a virgin. And in the Greek text of Isaiah, that's quoted, I should say, from Isaiah 7:14, in the New Testament, Matthew 1:23, it uses the Greek word parthenos, which is also in the Greek Septuagint of Isaiah 7:14, although there are several Jewish translations that came after the birth of Jesus, Symmachus, Aquila, and Theodotion, who render it neonis, which means basically the same thing, a young girl, a youthful girl. Often a girl who is not married or had relations with a man yet. Sometimes it refers to, as does parthenos, a girl who's very young and who is newly married, right? Who hasn't conceived yet, or who may have just been taken home, may not have even had sex yet. But often it refers to just a very young girl, both neonis and parthenos. And yet some people argue that the idea of Isaiah 7:14 foretelling a virgin birth is not correct. But as I'm going to show when we get to that text, the Hebrew term Alma does in fact include a virgin. So I'm reading here from the Brown, Driver, and Briggs Hebrew English Lexicon, Brown, Driver, Briggs, Gesenius. And in my version on page 761 under Alma, it says, be mature. Oh, I'm sorry, I was reading the wrong one. That was Alm. Under Alma, young woman, ripe sexually, maid, or newly married. Young women. Whoops. It landed perfectly. In the Kohler and Baumgartner Lexicon in Veteris Testamentum Libros, lexicon of the Old Testament, in my version on page 709 under Alma, it states marriageable girl, which would typically be a virgin in Israelite society, in Hebrew society. Young woman, right? A woman young enough to be marriageable, to not have had relations, but old enough to be at the age where she's, as we read from the Brown Driver Briggs lexicon, ripe sexually, so that she could have children. Young woman until the birth of her first child. So it can also refer to a young woman who has had relations, who is married, before she has her first child. And then I mentioned also earlier the two terms used in the Greek text of the Septuagint, in the Christian copies of the Septuagint, the copies that are at least preserved in the Christian codices, and the difference between them and the later Jewish versions of Isaiah 7:14. Whereas in the Christian versions, you have parthenos, just like in Matthew 1:23. In the later Jewish translations of Isaiah 7:14, you have neanis, which again, the two terms are not mutually exclusive. They can both refer to a young woman, even a young married woman, but who hasn't had a child yet, or to a virgin, a youthful girl who hasn't even had sex yet. Reading from the Greek English lexicon by Liddell Scott, a more classical Greek lexicon, but also inclusive of Septuagint Greek and sometimes references to the New Testament. On page 1164 of the version I'm using under neanis, it says, girl, maiden of a young married woman. As an adjective, youthful, new. And then under parthenos, this is page 1339 in the version I'm using. Parthenos, maiden, girl, virgin, of unmarried women who are not virgins. Virgin goddess, maiden, as an adjective, maiden, chaste. So you can see that in the definitions of the Hebrew term alma and the Greek terms neanis and parthenos, the understanding of a virgin is consistent. And in fact, as I'm going to show in just a moment, probably the most likely. And that's the understanding that in the New Testament is presented when it comes to the application of Isaiah 7:14 to Jesus. We'll get to it in just a moment. But let's go ahead and take a look at these other uses of alma and their translation of by both parthenos and neanis in the Greek. We'll start with Genesis 24:43. I'll go ahead and bring up the NWT. As you know, we use that primarily here if we don't use my translations, although you're free to use whatever translation you'd like. We will not tolerate criticism, especially of the pre-2013 NWT. I haven't fully reviewed the 2013 NWT, so I just don't really use it or comment on it right now. But I have a whole series going on explaining the superiority, morally and translationally, of the NWT over most English Bibles, if not all. So unless you really have good information and you're prepared to discuss it and be challenged, I don't want to hear it. Use whatever Bible you want. And if you think what I'm reading from the NWT is wrong, and you don't put anything down to try to explain your position, I'll just assume you accept it as right. Genesis 24:43. Right up here. And so here is where we have Abraham's servant coming to find a wife for their son, Isaac. And let's see, I'm just looking for a place for us to start contextually. So this is the account leading up to him, the servant, showing up at the fountain and meeting Rebecca. So it says in verse 42, when I got to the fountain today, then I said, Jehovah, the God of my master Abraham, if you are really giving success to my way on which I'm going, here I am stationed at a fountain of water. What must occur is that the maiden, and that's where you have the Hebrew term Alma and the Greek Parthenos, right? Just like we have in Isaiah 7:14 in the Christian copies, or the more accepted versions of the Septuagint, really. Although, again, several Jewish translations, later translations, use neanis, which, though, is still not exclusive of the understanding of virgin or young girl who would usually be a virgin. What must occur is that the maiden coming out to draw water, to whom I shall actually say, please, let me drink a little water from your jar, and who will indeed say to me, both take a drink, and I shall also draw water for your camels. She is the woman whom Jehovah has assigned for the son of my master. And then it goes on to talk about how Rebecca showed up and did just like he said. So are we to understand here that Rebecca was not a virgin? Right? She's still with her father Laban. And when Isaac goes and stays with them, there's no other man there, no other discussion about her not being a virgin. And it says, refers to her as, woman, right? She's there to get water. So she has jars for the water, or water carrying, receptacles. So she's clearly not probably a really young girl, but we don't know exactly, right? Still, I think it's pretty obvious she's not a virgin. I mean, she's a virgin here, based on what happens after this meeting, and when Isaac comes and stays with them, right? I mean, stays with them a long time until he gets Rebecca. Nothing ever implies that she had sex with another man or that there was another man. She's with her father. So here we have a use of Alma and Parthenos for what I think is pretty clearly a young woman who is a virgin. Let's take a look at Exodus 2:8. Exodus 2:8. Now, here we get a use of Alma, translated in the Greek, the traditional Greek Septuagint version, with neanis. Let's see what kind of woman we're talking about, or girl. So it talks about how certain men of the house of Levi took a daughter of Levi. The woman became pregnant, brought forth a son. When she saw how good looking he was, talking about Moses, she kept him concealed for 3 lunar months. When she was no longer able to conceal him, she then took for him an ark of papyrus and coated it with bitumen and pitch and put the child in it, put it among the reeds by the bank of the river. Further, his sister, that is Moses' sister, stationed herself at a distance to find out what would be done with him. After a while, Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the Nile River, and her female attendants were walking by the side of the Nile River. She caught sight of the ark in the middle of the reeds Immediately she sent her slave girl that she might get it. When she opened it, she got to see the child, and here the boy was weeping. At that, she felt compassion for him, although she said, "This is one of the children of the Hebrews." Then his sister, Moses' sister, from verse 4, said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and specially call for you a nursing woman from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?" So Pharaoh's daughter said to her, that is Moses' sister, "Go." At once the maiden, that's Alma and Neanis, went and called the child's mother. Okay, so there's no indication here whatsoever that Moses' sister is married, right? And clearly she didn't recently have a child, because otherwise she probably would have offered to nurse, right? Instead, she does what? She says, "Shall I go and call for you a nursing woman from the Hebrew women?" Which would be her if she was nursing. So she's clearly not nursing. If she had children, she probably wouldn't be presented this way in this account. She'd be with her children and her husband. Instead, she's out sneaking among the reeds to see what's going to happen to her little brother, her baby brother. So it strikes me that here we have a young girl, not married, and who doesn't have children. A virgin, Alma Neanis. Let's go to Proverbs 30:19. Proverbs 30:19. So nice to be back with you all. Looking forward to returning again. I see we have Pink Moon now with us. Very good, Pink Moon. As you know, what we need now, Purple Rain. Where are you, Purple Rain? You need to complete the cosmological and atmospheric equation that comes from the unique names of you and Pink Moon. Okay, Proverbs 30, let's read 18 to 19. There are 3 things that have proved too wonderful for me, and 4 that I have not come to know: the way of an eagle in the heavens, the way of a serpent on a rock, the way of a ship in the heart of the sea, the way of an able-bodied man with a maiden. So, these are the words of Agar, by the way. And so, in the last part of verse 19 that we just read, we have Alma. And in the Greek, it's different. In the Greek translation, it refers to the man, right here where it says, the way of an able-bodied man with a maiden. In the Greek text, it says, the way of an able-bodied man in his youth. The way he is as a young man. So it doesn't really give us any insight into how the Greek terms, usually neanis and parthenos, were being used or understood in relation to Alma. But in the Hebrew text, it does use Alma. And so the question is it talking about a virgin here? Or is it just talking about a woman, like of any age? And is it talking about a man with the woman for the first time? Or like when he's with a woman who's already had relations with somebody? We can't say. There's not enough information. The context is presenting a series of unique aspects of life. And so clearly, it goes on to talk about an adulterous woman in the next verse. So it doesn't seem to be talking about that kind of woman. It's really not determinable, but it seems to imply a kind of unique way that a man, a youthful man, has with a woman. Alma usually meaning a young woman. And really, what would be so unique about it if he's already been with her? Or if she's already been with other men, right? And is the unique aspect just that one specific man is with a woman who's been with many other men for the first time? That this is that man's first time with this woman, even though she's been with other men? That doesn't seem likely. And it's not really consistent with the ideas of the ancient Hebrews when it comes to promiscuous women, especially in the book of Proverbs, right? The first 7 chapters. So I believe, again, this has to do with a young woman who is with a man for the first time. There's something special about that. When a man takes a young virgin and they have relations together, there's a unique quality to it that is being presented here in association with other unique things, aspects of earthly life. But I can't say for sure. And it definitely doesn't for sure provide us with an instance of Alma for a non-virgin, because it's presenting the Alma with the man without any context supporting the idea that they've been together multiple times or that she's had multiple partners. That's not expressed here. And I think the uniqueness, once again, the association with these other aspects of life, suggests something like a man being with a virgin for the first time. We don't have a corresponding text in the Greek in terms of this last part. So it can't be used definitively one way or the other. But I think it definitely leans towards a non-promiscuous virgin who is with a man, and that this is a unique thing in the different aspects of life that people marvel at, that's special. All right, let's go to Psalm 68:25. Psalm 68:25. It says, "The singers went in front, the players on stringed instruments after them. In between were the maidens, Alma, beating tambourines." The Greek term is neanis, which, as we saw in Exodus 2:8, can mean a young girl or woman that doesn't appear to have had relations or is married or had a child. Right? It just doesn't appear at all that in the context of Exodus 2:8 that Moses' sister had a husband or had a child. And we also read from the Greek lexical source, Liddell's Scott Lexicon, that gives classical, Septuagint, and New Testament at times Greek understandings or definitions, that neanis can mean a young girl, one who's too youthful to have had sex or to have had a child. It doesn't always mean that. It can mean a newly married woman, and so can parthenos, even an unmarried woman who's had relations. So neither one exclusively mean virgin, but it can mean that, and it often does. And so far, right, we're reviewing all of the uses of Alma in the Old Testament, by the way. I've counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, including Isaiah 7:14, that we'll get to later. There are two other instances. Psalms 46:1 and 1 Chronicles 15:20 there's a derivational question in terms of whether that expression al-mot is derived from Alma. And I think it could be. And there are ways of translating it in those texts that would refer to young women. But that's not clear. So I'm not including those. So you might see references to 9 occurrences. That typically includes Psalm 46:1 and 1 Chronicles 15:20. But those are derivationally questionable in my opinion. So I'm not including those. Just using the 7. The ones we've considered so far, Isaiah 7:14 and 2 we'll get to in just a moment from the Song of Solomon. All right, so here though, once again, kind of like with Proverbs 30:19, it's not clear. There's nothing in the context that tells us these are virgins or that they're not virgins. It just uses Alma and Neanis, which usually refer to young women, youthful women, girls, often virgins, but not exclusively. So again, there's nothing here that makes it clear one way or the other. There's certainly nothing here that suggests they're promiscuous or non-virgins or that they're married. I think Proverbs 30:19 is still leaning more toward virgin because of the unique aspect presented in association with other unique aspects of life that really fit better with the context of a man with a virgin than a man with a promiscuous woman. Either way, Proverbs 30:19 and Psalm 68:25 are not clear. Let's go to Song of Solomon 1:3. Song of Solomon 1:3. A lot of very passionate and wonderfully hetero stuff here in the Song of Solomon. Obviously, Jah, Yahweh, Yahweh made us to be hetero, male and female. The very things that mentally deficient people today are questioning with no biological support because they have a mental illness that doesn't allow them to accept biology as a means for defining gender. And they deny the Bible, right? They deny the most obvious things. It's incredible. It's not just the atheists who promote homo stuff or who are too cowardly to tell the truth about homo from a scientific point of view. We have all these gender confused people out there running around creating all kinds of ridiculous categories, none of which are supported by science. And yet the Bible says what? Exactly what science says. So once again, who's on the side of science? All these atheistic homos that are abusing themselves and pretending that's love? All these gender confused people that don't even know what gender they are? Or the Bible? The Bible in both instances, of course. It's scientific. 2 genders, male and female. And of course, the non-abusive heterosex, like we read about in Song of Solomon, right? This is what humans are about. Humans who have relations with members of the opposite sex. The God of the Bible is a God of love. Heterosexual, passionate love. Okay, people can do things on their own in ways that express that in the context of their relationship. I'm just saying, Song of Solomon talks a lot about this stuff. And it's beautiful, is it not? So unlike all this abusive homo and transgender and bisexual sex stuff that abuses people, damages them, destroys their body, destroys their mind, emotionally fractures them, right? There's no benefit from the way these people are choosing to live. Go ahead and do it. I will not stop you, but I also will not lie to you like many atheists do, who pretend like it's no big deal. There's nothing wrong with it at all. Now, there's something wrong with it, and the Bible has it correct. The atheists who never bring it up in a correct way or warn people about the dangers have it wrong. just like they have most everything else wrong, because they don't really follow science. They just lie to themselves and gaslight other people and pretend to follow science. That's why they come up with some of the stupidest conclusions possible. For example, on the Miller-Urey experiments. Specifically, the idea that primitive compounds or the compounds like amino acids could form in primitive conditions, early Earth atmosphere that just happens to be there, right? Which they had to recreate with intelligence and apparatuses and measure and quantify the component parts. All this intelligent stuff, and they couldn't figure out that that would also have to be required, therefore, in an early Earth atmosphere. This is the stuff they're gaslighting everyone with. They'll actually conduct experiments that show intelligence would have to have been behind the formation of these compounds, and then turn right around and tell you they could have formed on their own, denying their own evidence, misunderstanding their own experiments, not to mention all the damage and destruction that come from their denial of homo abuse. Song of Solomon 1:3. For fragrance your oils are good. Like an oil that is poured out is your name. That is why maidens themselves have loved you. Maidens. So here we get another use of alma with neonis, which, like in Exodus 2:8, can clearly refer to a young girl that in no way appears to have a husband or to have had a child. Now, again, it's not entirely consistent here, or clear here, I should say, or consistent with Exodus 2:8 in terms of being clear. Because, right, it could be referring to young women who, because of the woman that Solomon is speaking about, have followed after her. Right? It could be other women who have had sex. It could be other young women who are even newly married. But it's not clear here, is it? And the idea that a bunch of young married women would be running after another woman is a little bit hard to believe. Even from an ancient perspective, right? I mean, it's hard to believe today that a bunch of married women, even young married women, would be so infatuated with this other woman as a group to be referred to in this way. It's possible, right? Women do at times, look to other women in ways where they appreciate their beauty, they appreciate their qualities, they appreciate the uniqueness of their physicality or person. So it's possible. But it does not appear clear here. And I think the suggestion is favoring once again the idea that these are a bunch of young girls that don't have husbands or children yet, or probably they wouldn't be referred to as so distracted by this other woman, this other young woman. It seems like something more to be found in a group of younger women without the obligations and distractions of a man or a child. But again, it's not clear, just like Proverbs 30:19 or Psalm 68:25. Song of Solomon 6:8. Let's see what we have here. Let's see where we want to start here. Right, so he's talking about his woman, his girl companion, how beautiful she is. He talks about how her teeth are like a drove of ewes that have come up from the washing, like a segment of pomegranate are your temples behind your veil. There may be, here's the verse, 60 queens and 80 concubines and maidens without number. One there is of my dove. 60 queens. All right, if you're a queen, you're married, right? You've got a king. 80 concubines. And if you're a concubine, you've had sex with a man. Maidens without number. Right? So clearly, if the concubines are 80 and the queens are 60, then the maidens who are without number are different. And it's kind of like Revelation 7, right? 144,000 and great crowd no man can number. Well, I've done a whole video about it. We've talked about it. So here you clearly have the relationship shown in terms of specific numbers and then without number. So these maidens, these Alma being the term that's used in the derivative sense of the plural, and Neonis, same thing, right? The singular used for the Greek in translating Alma. I'm keeping it simple. I want to keep it simple so you understand. We're talking about the instances of Alma. We're excluding the two derivationally questionable uses of Almot in Psalm 46:1 and 1 Corinthians 15:20. So I'm just dealing specifically with Alma and Neonis, and I'm going to phrase it in those terms so that you guys follow me and don't get distracted by other texts, derivationally questionable texts, or just so you understand the key terms in play. Parthenos, Neonis, two Greek terms that are used. Both can mean a virgin, often do mean virgin, but can also mean a woman who's newly married, ripe sexually, or who is married, has had sex, hasn't yet had a child, or who's unmarried and has had relations. But it often refers specifically to a virgin, a young woman who hasn't had sex yet and who's not married. Here we appear to have a group of young women that is different from a concubine and different from a queen. It's possible that Alma and Neonis here refer to other married women, but which would be more likely here, right? That they're referring to other married women without number, or to other young girls, young unmarried women who are not concubines and not queens without number. It seems more likely to me that this is being used of young girls, young women who are not married, like a queen is, and who are not having relations with a man, like a concubine does. But it's possible, right? We need to be fair here. We need to have a full understanding and appreciation for the use of these terms. It doesn't have to mean virgin in every sense. What does it most likely mean, though, based on the context? In a couple instances, it's hard to tell, like we've talked about. Here and in Proverbs 30:19, it's not totally clear, but I think the contextual implications suggest we're talking about unmarried virgins here. All right, now with this understanding, so we have read 1, 2, 3, 4, the 6 out of the 7 clear uses of Alma in the Old Testament. Again, some will say 9, but there's 2 derivationally questionable uses that I'm not going to include here. All 6 of those that we've read, either clearly like Genesis 24:43 with Rebekah, refer to a young woman who is a virgin, not married. Same with Exodus 2:8, I would say, Moses' sister. Not as clear as Genesis 24:43, but pretty clear when you consider the fact that she distinguished herself from the other nursing Hebrew women. She had time to be out in the reeds watching Moses. Doesn't seem like someone who has a husband or children at home. So I would argue that clearly implies that she is either married and hasn't had a child, or she's unmarried and hasn't had a child. And then Proverbs 30:19 and Psalm 68:25, as well as Song of Solomon 1:3, not as clear, not enough information really, right? But nothing that would suggest they're not virgins or that they're married and have had children. None of those three texts had anything that suggested that. And then this one that is a little more clear, that I would put into the category of probably right out. I'd say Genesis 24:43, clear. Rebecca was a virgin, not married. Exodus 2:8, pretty clear. Moses' sister doesn't appear to have been a virgin or married. And then Song of Solomon 6:8, fairly clear based on the association and distinction between 60 queens and 80 concubines. So the weight of evidence is what I'm getting at. Favors all six, right? The three that are not clear, the three that are fairly clear, pretty clear, and really clear, they're all in the direction of, if not absolutely like Genesis 24:43, virgin, unmarried young woman. There's nothing in any of these six texts that we've read, nothing that suggests that the Alma is not a virgin, has had a child, or is even newly married without a child. So again, the evidence, the weight of evidence is strongly entirely on the side of virgin, not married, or not determinable. Not enough information. There's nothing in the category of non-virgin, newly married, but with no child. Nothing. All right, now let's go to our subject text, Isaiah 7:14. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to read from verse 14 all the way to Isaiah 9, 5, and 6, that context. Because I believe that the child referred to in this text, Isaiah 7:14, is pretty clearly the same child talked about in Isaiah 9, 5, and 6. Let's see if you conclude the same thing. Starting in verse 14. Therefore, Jehovah himself will give you men a sign. Look, the maiden herself. Hebrew text, Alma. Traditional Greek text or texts in the Christian, we'll call them Christian codices, Parthenos, and in later Jewish Greek translations of this text, Neanis. All three terms can mean virgin. They don't always mean that, but every other use of Alma that we've read, and in the Hebrew Bible, period, right? All 7 of the clear instances either clearly means virgin, unmarried, young girl without a child, pretty much means that, likely means that, or we can't tell. None of them mean non-virgin or someone newly married without child or with a child. None of those three. There's no indication in any of the terms that the woman, the Alma, in those texts were married, had a child, or had had sex. The maiden, the Alma, the Parthenos, or in the later Jewish, Neanis, herself will actually become pregnant. And she is giving birth to a son, and she will certainly call his name Immanuel, which means, as you will read in Matthew 1:23, God is with us. Butter and honey he will eat by the time he knows how to reject the bad and choose the good. For before the boy will know how to reject the bad and choose the good, the ground of whose 2 kings you are feeling a sickening dread will be left entirely. Jehovah will bring against you and against your people and against the house of your father days, such as have not come in since the day of Ephraim's turning away from alongside Judah, namely the king of Assyria. So we definitely have a historical context here in which something is being promised during a time when the people are feeling a sickening dread, right, due to the king of Assyria. And in verse 18, it goes on to say, and it must occur in that day that Jehovah will whistle for the flies that are at the extremity of the Nile, canals of Egypt, and for the bees that are in the land of Assyria. They will certainly come in and settle down, all of them, and upon the precipitous torrent valleys, upon the clefts of the crags, and upon the thorn thickets, and upon the watering places. In that day, by means of a hired razor in the region of the river, even by means of the king of Assyria, Jehovah will shave the head and the hair of the feet, and it will sweep away even the beard itself. And it must occur in that day that an individual will preserve alive a young cow of the herd and 2 sheep. And it must occur that due to the abundance of the producing milk, he will eat butter, because butter and honey are what everyone left remaining in the midst of the land will eat. Does that sound like any period in the history of Israel? A time when everyone left remaining in the midst of the land will eat butter and honey? Let's go on. It must occur in that day that every place where there used to be 1,000 vines worth 1,000 pieces of silver will come to be for the thorn bushes, and for the weeds it will come to be. With arrows and the bow he will come there, because all the land will become mere thorn bushes and weeds. All the mountain used to be cleared of troublesome plants. With a hoe you will not come there for fear of thorn bushes and weeds. And it will certainly become a place for letting bulls loose, and a trampling around the sheep. Trampling ground, for sheep. Chapter 8, verse 1. Jehovah proceeded to say to me, take for yourself a large tablet, and write upon it with the stylus of mortal man, Maher Shalal Hashbaz, and let me have attestation for myself by faithful witnesses, Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of my transliteration here has done these little question mark things, so I apologize. I'm going to skip some of these terms. If there's too many, there's 3 question marks in that, a name right there. And contextually, I can't recall it, so I apologize. So I'm going to skip whenever I see that little unique transliteration scheme, so I don't mispronounce the names. Then I went near to the prophetess, and she came to be pregnant, and in time gave birth to a son. And Jehovah now said to me, call his name Maher-Shal al-Hashbaz, for before the boy will know how to call out, my father and my mother, one will carry away the resources of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria before the king of Assyria. And Jehovah proceeded to speak yet further to me, saying, for the reason that this people has rejected the waters of the Shiloh that are going gently, and there is exultation over Rezin and the son of Remaliah, even therefore, look, Jehovah is bringing up against them the mighty and the many waters of the river, the king of Assyria and all his glory, and he will certainly come up over all his stream beds and go over all his banks, and move on through Judah, and he will actually flood and pass over. Up to the neck he will reach, and the outspreading of his wings must occur to fill the breadth of your land, O Immanuel. People frequently don't realize that Immanuel is not just used in verse 14 for the name of the promised son, but it's also used in verse 8, as well as verse 10, which we'll get to in a moment. And so this seems to be again referring to a future time when this child would provide a means of deliverance from the dread that the Israelites are feeling and the people of Judah are feeling. The Hebrews, right, the people of God at this time. Verse 9, be injurious, O you peoples, and be shattered to pieces, and give ear, all of you distant parts of the earth. Gird yourselves, be shattered to pieces. Gird yourselves, and be shattered to pieces. It's pretty extreme, wouldn't you say? So there's clearly a lot of problems being anticipated here. In verse 10, put out a scheme, and it will be broken up. Speak any word, and it will not stand. For God is with us, or for Immanuel. Now, in the Masoretic text, these two instances of Immanuel appear to be separated in terms of separate words. Whereas in the Great Isaiah scroll, they're not. So either whether they're separate words or one word, I believe they're all consistent and relate directly to verse 14, same term used, Immanuel, and that Immanuel is being looked to here all throughout this context, right? All the way from verse 14 of chapter 7, all the way down to what we just read in verse 10. And we're almost at chapter 9. Verse 11, chapter 8, for this is what Jehovah has said to me with strongness of the hand, that he may make me turn aside from walking in the way of this people, saying, you men must not say a conspiracy, respecting all that of which this people keep saying a conspiracy. And the object of their fear you men must not fear, nor must you tremble at it. Jehovah of armies, he is the one whom you should treat as holy. He should be the object of your fear, and he should be the one causing you to tremble. Verse 14, he must become as a sacred place, as a stone to strike against, and as a rock over which to stumble both the houses of Israel, as a trap and as a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many among them will be certain to stumble and to fall and be broken and to be ensnared and caught. Wrap up the attention, put a seal about the law among my disciples. I will keep an expectation of Jehovah, who is concealing his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. So again, we see this looking to the future, right? This hope in him. And we really aren't told anything about who the mother or father of Immanuel is. No names are given anywhere. There's one association in verse 3 of chapter 8 between Immanuel and a prophetess. She became pregnant and time gave birth to a son. But look at the name. Maher-Shal al-Hashbaz. Right? So that doesn't appear to be the same. If it is, then all we're really told about the mother is that she was a prophetess or a prophetess. And I'm going to argue that if it is the case that even Mary, right, because Mary was, as we're going to see in a moment, was visited by angels, or at least one angel, and told about what would happen. And then she obviously would have had that knowledge and information to be able to share with others at some point. And so that he was foretold as the one who would deliver Israel, the one who would save his people. Remember, a prophet or a prophetess, it can be someone who's correctly teaching God's will or telling things that are going to happen, one of which would be that Jesus would save his people. So you could look at Mary as a prophetess, absolutely. That's really all we're told about Immanuel's parents. Whereas in most other instances, all throughout the Hebrew Bible, the names of the children who are foretold or talked about are given. Not with Immanuel, though. And so we get this vague understanding of his parents, and we get the promise about how his name would mean that God is with us, given in 7:14, and then again in 8:8 and in 8:10, in association with the deliverance of God's people. Right? And so then we get all the way down, we can start talking about how we should put our hope in Jehovah, keep an expectation of him, hope in him, looking to the future. Verse 18, look, I and the children whom Jehovah has given me are as signs and as miracles in Israel from Jehovah of armies, who is residing in Mount Zion. And in case they should say to you people, apply to the spiritistic mediums or to those having a spirit of prediction, who are chirping and making utterances in low tones, is it not to its God that any people should apply? Should there be an application to dead persons in behalf of living persons? To the law and to the attestation, verse 20. Surely they will keep saying what is according to the statement that will have no light of dawn. Verse 21. And each will certainly pass through the land hard pressed and hungry. And it must occur that because he is hungry and has made himself feel indignant, he will actually call down evil upon his king and upon his God, and will certainly peer upward. I'm reading all this because, again, we're getting this consistent depiction of specifically Immanuel, but then also how the children are as signs and miracles from Jehovah of armies. In this case, specifically Immanuel, and how there would be a hoping in Jehovah until this deliverance occurs. And then in verse 22, it says, and to the earth he will look, and lo, distress and darkness, obscurity, hard times and gloominess with no brightness. However, verse 1, chapter 9, the obscureness will not be as when the land had stress, as at the former time when one treated with contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, when at the later time one caused it to be honored, the way the sea in the region of the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. Verse 2, the people that were walking in the darkness have seen a great light. As for those dwelling in the land of deep shadow, light itself has shone upon them. You have made the nation populous. For it you have made the rejoicing great. They have rejoiced before you as with the rejoicing in the harvest time, as those who are joyful when they divide up the spoil. Verse 4, for the yoke of their load and the rod upon their shoulders, the staff of the one driving them to work, you have shattered to pieces as in the day of Midian. For every boot of the one tramping with tremors, and the mantle rolled in blood have even come to be for burning as food for fire. For there has been a child born to us. There has been a son given to us. What did Isaiah 7:14 say? Jehovah will give you men a sign. The maiden, the Alma, the Parthenos, the Neanis, usually a virgin, someone who hasn't had a child. The maiden herself will have a child, will give birth to a son. His name will be called Immanuel, God with us. We get it again, 8 verse 8, 8 verse 10, hoping in Jehovah, all the way through to chapter 9, where again, there has been a child born to us, a son given to us, and the princely rule will come to be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, or in the Septuagint, Angel of Great Counsel, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. To the abundance the princely rule, and to peace there will be no end. Upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, in order to establish it firmly and to sustain it by means of justice, by means of righteousness, and now on and to time indefinite, the very zeal of Jehovah of armies will do this. That's not talking about the days of Isaiah, the days when many of these events in relation to the Assyrians were happening. Right? There did come to be an end to anyone's princely rule back then. But this child here, which clearly, as we just read, seems to be connected with the child right here, whose name would be Immanuel, and who is called Immanuel here in association with the deliverance of God's people, and here, who would not allow schemes against God's people to stand, all the way to right here. And it's not that far. This Isaiah 9, 5 and 6 and 7 this is a pretty brief reading from Isaiah 7:14 to Isaiah 9, 5, 6, and 7. You mean to tell me that Immanuel of Isaiah 7:14, Isaiah 8:8, and Isaiah 8:10, who is explicitly presented as God with us in association with God being with us, or God's people then, and delivering them, is different from this child right here? I don't see that. It seems to be all connected and culminating in what we read right here about it never ending, about the other names of this child. And this right here, to the abundance of his princely rule and peace, there'll be no end. That's not talking about back then. That is future stuff. We're talking about things that are being foretold, and even in the Jewish Targum, Aramaic Bible, Aramaic translations of the Hebrew books of the Bible. This version by Bruce D. Chilton. In the Aramaic Targum of Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, it says, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you the sign. Behold, the young woman is pregnant and shall bear a son and shall call his name Immanuel." But then in the notes, it says, far from being taken as a prediction of a messianic figure, compare Matthew 1:23, the present paragraph speaks of the judgment which follows on the prophetic offer of wonders and signs. Right. Wonders and signs. Miracles and signs. That's what children, it said right here, are. We go back to verse 8. In verse 18, "Look, I and the children whom Jehovah has given me are as signs and miracles in Israel from Jehovah of armies." So Chilton here claims that Isaiah 7:14 is far from a prediction of a messianic figure, when it's not far at all from Isaiah 9, 5 through 7, which in Chilton's own translation, Aramaic, the translation of the Hebrew in the Aramaic text, but translated into English in this text, it's the English translation of the Aramaic translation. In Isaiah 9, 5 and 6, well 6 and 7, there's a lot of additional material in verse 5. Verse 6, "The prophet said to the house of David, for to us a child is born, to us a son is given. He will accept the law upon himself to keep it, and his name will be called Before the Wonderful Counselor." Before is added here, it's in italics. the mighty God existing forever. The Aramaic translation of the Hebrew text changes it. The Aramaic Targums came about later, most of which probably, including the Isaiah Targum, after Jesus came. It's not to say there weren't Aramaic translations of the Hebrew of Isaiah before Jesus. But the Aramaic Targum on which this translation is based, it's either very divergent from the Hebrew text or purposefully different from the Hebrew text of Isaiah because of what was believed in association with Jesus. But it says his name will be called before the Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, existing forever, the Messiah, in whose days peace will increase upon us. So there's no denying in Chilton's own translation, even in his note here, he says the distinction between the Messiah and God is made out clearly in the Targumic rendering, right? Because it's different. He's called Mighty God or a Mighty God and an Angel of Great Counsel in the Hebrew of Isaiah 9, 6, and 7, and in the Greek text. But in the Aramaic Targum, it says that his name is called before or in the presence of the Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, right? So his name's being called out before God, basically. So that's what he means when he says there's a distinction between the Messiah and his God in the Targumic reading. But it says his name would be called the Messiah, in whose days peace will increase upon us. So, and it goes on to say, great pride will belong to those who perform the law, and for those who keep peace, there will be no end upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to establish and to build it with judgment and with virtue from this time forth and forever. So there's no question that even in the Targum, there is a messianic understanding in Jewish history, even when they're distinguishing between the Messiah and God or the Mighty God, Wonderful Counselor, probably because of the Jesus controversy. This text is accepted as messianic by Chilton and by the Aramaic Targum itself. And yet they don't see the connection between that accepted messianic description in Isaiah 9, 5 through 7, or 6 and 7, depending on which text you're using, and Immanuel, God with us, the child that is born to us in 7:14. Maiden herself will become pregnant. She's giving birth to a son and call his name Immanuel, which is then referred to again in chapter 8 twice, leading all the way through the context of hoping in Jehovah for a future time when they would be delivered, and at the time when the child born to us would establish a princely rule that would never end. I see a connection all the way through. And based on the uses of Alma that we read earlier, all of them, all 6 other uses of Alma, either we couldn't determine, not enough information, 3 of them, or the other 3 clearly applied to a virgin, unmarried, young woman without a child, probably referred to a unmarried young woman without a child who hadn't had sex, and possibly. They're all clearly in or in some sense in the category of supporting a virgin birth for Alma in Isaiah 7:14. It's possible that Alma is being used of someone who has had sex or who's newly married but hasn't had a child. It's within the range of meanings, but the predominant meaning is a young girl who is a virgin. And the instances of Alma in the Hebrew Bible, as well as Parthenos and Neanis, the 2 Greek terms used in the Christian and Jewish translations of Isaiah 7:14, also support this understanding. So you're arguing against the information that we have if you prefer an understanding of Alma in Isaiah 7:14 or Parthenos or Neanis that isn't a young girl who is a virgin and who has not had a child or sex yet. Now let's go to the New Testament. Matthew 1:23. Here, now just think about this for a moment. What would be easier for the Christians to have argued? Right? I mean, they can argue for an understanding of Alma, Parthenos, Neanis as a newly married woman who just hasn't had a child yet. They can argue that it refers to a woman who has had sex. They're not the most likely, but it's within the range. But they don't. They present it this way. Matthew 1, let's read 20 through 23. But after he had thought these things over, look, Jehovah's angel appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary your wife home. For that which has been begotten in her is by Holy Spirit. So she's been promised to Joseph in marriage. She's referred to here as his wife, but he hasn't taken her home yet. So being promised to someone in marriage, you're still that person's wife, if you're a woman. But he hasn't taken her home or had relations with her yet, according to this. And it says that she has had a child begotten of Holy Spirit. And it says the angel goes on to say, she will give birth to a son, and you must call his name Jesus. He will save his people from their sins. And then Matthew adds, all this actually came about for that to be fulfilled, which was spoken by Jehovah through his prophet, saying, look, the virgin will become pregnant and will give birth to a son, and they will call his name Immanuel, which means, when translated, with us is God. Just like we read 3 times from Isaiah 7 through Isaiah 8, then in Isaiah 9, coming to the child born whose princely rule would never end. So here in the New Testament, right, we get Parthenos used, which again can most likely means virgin, unmarried woman who hasn't had sex yet, or again, it could mean a newly married woman who just hasn't had a child. But here, the reference to go ahead and take her home and that she's going to give birth to a son, and the fact that he was going to divorce her because, he knows he's not the father of the child, right? They take wouldn't this be the most difficult thing to prove? Right? Wouldn't it have been a lot easier for them to just say, if they were making all this up, right, and they were not recording events that actually were believed to have happened, wouldn't it have been easier for them to just say that Joseph married Mary, took her home, and she became pregnant, and that God's angel visited them and said, what has been conceived in you is not something human, but it is begotten by Holy Spirit. And then you are to call his name Jesus, and then to apply Isaiah 7:14 to him, because God is with us in the person of his Son. Just like Jesus says in John 14, right? It's explicit, right? You've seen me, you've seen the Father. I'm not doing my own works. The Father is in me. I talked about this in my last video, part 19 of the Bible and the Trinity in Conflict. The Father is in me doing his works. Well, you don't get much more God with us than God being in you doing his works that you're not doing because they're not yours. That sounds like God being with us to me. Pretty explicitly, I would say, right? About as explicit as you could get. If you're attributing everything you're doing to someone else who's doing it through you and in you. Just like creation. So they pick the most difficult and most unbelievable understanding of Alma from Isaiah 7:14 and Parthenos, that of a virgin who is conceived in her a child miraculously, versus just saying Joseph took her home, had relations, but that through that process of normal, God-ordained husband and wife relations, the child was conceived with God's Holy Spirit and is going to be his son. God's Holy Spirit overrode essentially whatever would define it as Joseph's son. It wouldn't be that hard to do. And then you wouldn't have to explain how a woman could become pregnant without having sex with a man. If I were making up a story, that would be what I would do, because it doesn't require me to promote something so unusual. Unless, hello Laura, good to see you. Unless that's actually how Isaiah 7:14 was understood, and that's actually what happened to Mary. That she had conceived in her something without relations with a man, was told what it was, what happened. Joseph was going to leave her, but then stayed with her because of what he was told. It sounds to me like they really believed this is what happened. And that instead of choosing the much easier to defend position that they actually had relations, conceived of a child, and God's Holy Spirit came upon her in the conception, and that his son was born through their union nonetheless, right? That they could still say that. They don't. Because I think they wrote and believed what actually happened, and that was accepted as consistent with Isaiah 7:14. Let's go to our last text, Luke 1:26 through 35. In her 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent forth from God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin, Parthenos, promised in marriage to a man named Joseph of David's house. And the name of the virgin was Mary. Now again, you can understand this to mean young woman, unmarried, hasn't had sex, virgin. Or you could understand it as someone who has had sex, unmarried and who's had sex. That's not the meaning we understood or gathered at all from the uses of Alma, but lexically, in association with the Greek terms Parthenos and Neanis, Parthenos being used here, it's possible. But the predominant meaning that we saw in the 6 other uses aside from Isaiah 7:14 of Alma was of a young girl who is a virgin, unmarried, without child. So there's nothing wrong with understanding that meaning, the predominant and most likely meaning of at least 3 of the 6 uses, the other 3 being without enough information, as what it says. There's nothing that argues against that. There's nothing in the meaning of the term Alma that argues against that in the text that we read. And virgin is consistent with both Parthenos and Neanis. So there's just nothing. The only thing anyone could suggest is that, well, Parthenos and Neanis don't always mean a virgin. Okay, so? But they do mean virgin at times, or young girl who is a virgin. So you haven't proven anything but what we already know. And what they believe here is the most difficult to prove, but most consistent meaning of the term used in Isaiah 7:14, which is quoted in Matthew 1:23. Let's read the rest of this account. And he went in before her, and when he went in before her, he said, "Good day, highly favored one." This is the angel Gabriel. He's talking here to Mary. Jehovah is with you. Verse 29, but she was deeply disturbed at the saying and began to reason out what sort of greeting that might be, or this might be. So the angel said to her, have no fear, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And look, you will conceive in your womb and give birth to a son, and you are to call his name Jesus. This one will be great, and he will be called Son of the Most High. And Jehovah God will give him the throne of David his father, just like we read in the context from Isaiah 7:14 all the way through Isaiah 9, 5, and 6, or 7 in the Hebrew text. And he will rule as king over the house of Jacob forever, and there will be no end of his kingdom. Verse 34, but Mary said to the angel, and remember, Jesus didn't establish a kingdom on earth, right? So we can't argue similarly to the way I explained in Isaiah chapter 9, how there would be no end to his princely rule and to peace, that does not fit any ancient Hebrew kingdom of the past. It doesn't fit anything in the context of Jesus either, because Jesus didn't come to establish a kingdom. My kingdom is no part of this world. And even though he oversees all the rulers of the earth, right, just like Revelation 1 says, that's different because they're ruling over a sinful world that is temporarily here until his kingdom is fully established and brings about God's will for the earth, Matthew 6. So even this here, right, if this would have been written, he will rule as king over the house of Jacob forever, and there'll be no end of his kingdom. And if the Christian writings had said Jesus came and established his kingdom on the earth, and then it was destroyed, like some of the Jews of his time were expecting, right, a human king figure, well, then it would be the same thing. We would be like, well, that couldn't have applied to him then, because his kingdom did come to an end. In the same way that we can argue that Isaiah 9, 5, 6, and 7 does not apply to any Hebrew king of the past, we could have argued if Jesus came to establish a kingdom on earth and to rule as king here and now and didn't reject being a king now, which he did, right? That's the key point. He actually made it plain. It's not right now. My time is not now. So you can't argue in the same way. You can't argue similarly, like with all those other Hebrew kings, that Isaiah 9, 5, 6, and 7 doesn't apply to Jesus, the way many Jews today argue, right? See, the New Testament and the presentation of Jesus is all consistent. It's consistent with him being born of a young woman, a virgin. It's consistent with him not establishing a kingdom on this earth and having a kingdom later after he's raised up, right? Just like we talked about in our discussions of Isaiah chapter 11 and chapter 53, that he would be raised up as a signal to the nations, that he would carry the error of many. These are all things consistent with Jesus living, dying, and living again, and eventually having a kingdom after he served as the last Adam that would never end. So there's nothing that contradicts it. I find it hard to believe they could have just created a story with all of those unique elements, part of it, part of all three of the great message accounts, all four, I'm sorry, and just gotten it all right? I mean, that their consistency with the idea that Jesus, they're going to take the most difficult path to explain Isaiah 7:14, that he was conceived supernaturally, right? Because that's just how it would have had to have been, probably, I guess, right? Because you can't have the union of two sinful humans produce a perfect last Adam. But if God is the one who is causing his son to be born through the human embryo or egg of Mary, then the sin transfer wouldn't take effect, because you would need two humans for that to happen. But with God as the Father, him transferring the Son without a sexual act, but supernaturally causing the spirit of his Son to be infused with Mary's egg and be born as a man, sinless and capable of performing the entire law without failing, That all makes sense, right? You can argue it didn't happen, but it makes sense. It explains how it could happen without there being sin in the way, and how Jesus could then be the way, the truth, and the life, leading us to the Father, and that great light that we also read about in the context of Isaiah 7, 8, and 9, all the way from verse 14 to verses 5, 6, and 7 of Isaiah 9. To me, they all flowed together. They're all talking about the same child, except for perhaps the child of the prophetess. Not sure. It may be that that's just another name for Immanuel, just like the other names that he's given in terms of the titular references and descriptions. Angel of great counsel, wonderful counselor, mighty God, right? These descriptions that serve as proper names, effectively, right? They're unique expressions, right? Goes back to the whole Sharp's rule thing. They're not common nouns, that's for sure. They're unique descriptions that fit one or two individuals at most. And in the case of Isaiah 9, 5, 6, and 7, one. Just like Immanuel. But that doesn't make him God. It just means God's with us through him. It could mean he's God, I guess. But that's not how Jesus explains it, does he? He explicitly tells us he's not doing his own will. He's not telling us his own teachings. That the Father is in him doing his works. That's God with us in someone else, not that person as God to us, even though that is what he is to us because the Father's working through him. You see the difference I'm making? Trinitarians and others argue, of course, that the Word became flesh and incarnated as God among humankind. That's not what it teaches, though. It teaches in the Bible he became lower than the divine, lower than the gods. Psalm 8:5, Hebrews 2, 8 and 9. The last Adam, who was not of God kind. Again, like Psalm 8:5, made lower than the angels, lower than the sons of God, the gods. The very gods that Jesus uses in his defense in John 10. So we know it's not talking about him as God with us, but as him. And the Father working through him, and that's how God is with us. By him doing everything God tells him to do. By the Father working through him and telling him what to do. He says that over and over again in John 7, John 8, John 10, John 12. Just to state several chapters of the same teaching in one book of the Bible. But it's over and over again. It's like you can't miss it. Unless you're loyal to later tradition, right? That invalidates the Word of God. This later false doctrine stuff that we have a whole series going on and discussing in terms of why it's not correct. We realize you Trinitarians may have some good people among you and want to be Christian, but you've embraced false doctrine. I'm sorry. We all know this. It's not hard to find. You're following after a pagan emperor who built gigantic idols of himself and who presided over a council of false teachers and liars, who created a belief, created a new metaphysic that's against the belief, against the metaphysic of the Bible. Some of you may be nice people. I'm not saying that. But you're teaching false doctrine. You often teach it in regard to Isaiah 7:14 and Immanuel. And we just went through the whole context to show that your understanding is not correct. That it's the prophecy about how a child would be born to a young girl, a virgin, someone who hadn't had sex before. It's actually a prophecy about something miraculous. And isn't that what it said? That children, in Isaiah 8:18, children would serve as signs and miracles for God's people. And every child is a miracle. It's not a child you can have through the homo union, though, is it? Because that's not from God. It's abusive, damaging. It's anything but from God. And yet all these people want to tell us there is no God. Well, why don't you look at your own practices? we'll look at our God and the promises he made, some of which are through the birth of children, which male and females make, that serve as signs and miracles. And in this case, the child born to us, Immanuel, God with us, because God is with the child that is born to us, is a child that in the context of Isaiah 7:14, all the way through Isaiah 9, 5, 6, and 7, is a child that is described in the context of a future time when there would be hope for God's people, when that child would be given a princely rule, would establish peace that would not end. When that child, just a couple chapters after what we read in Isaiah chapter 11, I did a whole video about it in this series, is described as presiding over a time, a future time that has not yet arrived, when this peace that would never end would follow his being lifted up as a signal to the nations. And the only ancient Hebrew that is looked to by all the nations and by many Hebrews as a sign, as a miracle, is Jesus Christ.